Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Sakamoto Ryoma Lancer's newest upgrade. That's going to be his NP Interlude. Now, Ryoma Lancer has been a very interesting unit ever since he came out, and I have seen some amazingly bad takes on this character, and as a result, I do feel the need to kind of say something here right off the bat, and that's that while this buff absolutely does help Ryoma, this buff is almost helping it in a way that most people don't realize. You see, where the biggest gain in this buff is damage. And yet, I keep seeing a ton of people talk about Ryoma's Refund. Well, the issue here is that Sakamoto Ryoma, for a long period in time in the community, has been kind of held up as an example of an arts unit that refunds bad. And that's not the case at all. It literally never has been. Sakamoto Ryoma has always been a Black Grail looping character. And so it's kind of one of those weird issues where people really feel the need to kind of dog on a character that's maybe not their favorite or somehow threatening to one of their favorites. Ryoma, in a large way, should never have been that threatening to most people because, frankly speaking, his biggest issue has always been his damage. Ryoma comes to us pretty much right after Melisson comes into the game, so already right off the bat, that was a non-starter for a lot of people. Melisson came out, she was immediately very strong, and people just kind of took that and ran with it. So when Ryoma came out in the Gouda event right after, people just didn't really have that much interest in them. And I don't blame them. I'm not going to fault anybody who maybe had their misconceptions about Ryoma in the past, but I am going to try to clear them up. So, Ryoma, as you guys know, is a limited unit. He's a unit that basically is a 5-star variant of a 4-star welfare. A lot of people love Oreo here, his companion, so to speak. And so, to a degree, Ryoma's always been somewhat popular, but not maybe to the tier that like some of the biggest husbandos or waifus in the game are. I do think it's a sort of beloved unit for a lot of people, but again, still not that insane level of popularity. Now, the issue with Ryoma stems from a lot of things. For starters, he just does not have a ton of attack, and that's always been something that has been held against him by the community, but I'm going to say, remember, attack is not everything. In fact, what really dictates whether or not a unit will be strong is the summation of all their parts. So this was certainly an issue that I think a lot of people looked at, but really the kind of issue lies deeper in. And if you look at his skills, he's definitely got a nice set. He's got 20% darts up on his first skill, but also then a 30% arts up on his third. So he still has 50% of a steroid there, each one of those being a 3-turn duration. So nothing too bad with that. He does have a little bit of crit damage baked in there, does have the buster up in the star gen, and his second skill here is a 50% charge skill. Now, I've long kind of held that in FGO, it's pretty difficult to be a bad unit if you have a 50% charge skill. And this does hold true here, because due to this skill, even though people thought Ryoma refunded bad, it actually is what enables Ryoma to Black Grail loop. And furthermore, this really just kind of was always the case with him. Where Ryoma actually does struggle, and still struggles after this upgrade, is that Ryoma is not going to be that unit that's just going to be able to like double Castoria loop and kind of be fine. You can do that with him with different craft essences. You can absolutely allow him, if you give him some starting charge, to be able to loop through nodes. But if you're trying to start him out from zero, trying to get the most bang for your buck and, you know, slap a Black Grail or something like that on him, this is going to be one of those situations where at that point, you're going to need the third support. This does happen for a lot of units in the game, and we actually see a lot of people in kind of discussions about units hold this against people. I understand nobody really wants to use Plug Suit, but this isn't really a knock against any unit in the game, and in fact, I'm going to say some of people's favorite units also use Plug Suit to operate in a 3-turn environment. realistically, people need to stop looking at Plug Suit as a detriment. Obviously, it makes a node take longer, it's more button presses. But at the end of the day, it's also the singular most powerful damage amplification tool in the entire game, even stronger than something like Oberon. And the reason why is because it quite literally can add another Oberon to your composition, in addition to what it already does. So things like Plug Suit shouldn't be looked down on, they should naturally be instead something that is just accepted as part of a composition. Yes, we do have units that can loop through even with just the 2 supports. That's obviously really good for those units, but naturally those units tend to have really high refund and usually really low damage to offset this sort of thing. There are some obvious exceptions to this rule, but in general, that's the idea and the premise behind the balance choice there, and this is why, again, I'm going to say that things like a Plug Suit are not a bad draw. So him having the 50% charge, not a bad thing, and this is actually really good for him down the stretch even after the update, because what this enables him to do, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's go actually talk about Ryoma's actual update here. So we get to his Noble Phantasm, and this is what the devs decided, you know what, Ryoma just needs a Noble Phantasm upgrade. You know, personally, I would have liked to see that a little bit for Lartoria, but I'm not going to look the gift horse in the mouth for the buff that she got. But it is an interesting thing to see them immediately right after do another Noble Phantasm upgrade. So his Noble Phantasm started out as a 3-hit Arts NP. He's AoE, so 3 hits turns into 9 in a 3 enemy wave, but 3 hits is not a whole lot. That being said, some of the same people that were criticizing Ryoma in the past were kind of being a little bit willfully unaware that, yeah, even units like Space Ishtar have a 3-hit NP. So kind of trying to hold that against him somehow is a little bit hypocritical of some people. But I digress. The point being that obviously this will limit his refund somewhat, and you guys can see he increases his own defense by 50% for 1 turn. This does mean that he's going to be a little bit tanky every turn that he NPs, which if you have his NP rolling turn after turn in a challenge environment, means he's going to be a really hard unit to bring down and somebody that's definitely going to take a lot less damage. He also increases his own NP damage for 3 turns activating first. It's one of the strongest aspects to his NP because this will stack every time you loop him, and it is something that interacts favorably with the likes of Oberon. So definitely a really nice thing for him. But they come back in, they upgrade this NP, and what they do is they add an additional 20% NP generation for 1 turn activating first. Now let's talk about this. You're probably going to go, oh, well, Cad, you just said he didn't have bad NP gain, so why did they add NP gain to him? Well, that's an interesting idea. And the issue at play here is that this actually doesn't do that much for him. You see, this does help him out some, but this realistically does not change his looping scenario at all. You're still going to be able to use the same units that you already could with him, and this doesn't really allow him to be able to get away with even more. Instead, what this does is this actually enables him to work in certain select situations that he struggled in before. And I'll detail those for you guys here in a second. But interestingly enough, this doesn't actually make a huge change. Why? Because he was already a unit that did have only about 50% refund off of his MP. So as a result, a arts unit that naturally had a little bit lower refund and relied more on brute force charging, adding a little bit more refund to them doesn't go a whole long way. And so as a result, this is a nice benefit, but it's not a huge deal. From here, we upgraded his damage. It's just a standard upgrade. So basically what that meant, and you guys can actually see this here if you go back to the normal version, is that NP2 at 600% became the new NP1 at 600%. NP5 at 750% became the new NP2 at 750%. That's how a standard NP interlude goes for literally every unit in the game, unless they have a non-standard one. And it's a really interesting thing to see, and we'll show that to you with the actual damage numbers here in a minute. From here, they also added the ability to automatically drain the gauge of enemies by 1. That's actually probably the strongest effect here outside of the damage. This is really, really good because this means that Ryoma, as he continues to loop through, will just keep depriving enemies of their Noble Phantasm. Thing is, Ryoma's not necessarily going to be the strongest unit with regards to a continual loop because he is lower refund. So what this means is that he's going to be stronger in a scenario where you maybe don't have a perfect set of 3 enemy waves, but maybe weaker in a scenario where he has to go the distance longer after 3 turns. That's just the natural impact of relying on MP gain versus relying on charge like he does. So because he relies on charge, he's not necessarily going to have the same staying power that a unit that naturally relies on more refund might. But it is an interesting thing to see nonetheless, and frankly speaking, you know, steroids from supports always play a factor in that sort of thing anyways, so as they wear off, even a refund unit might struggle in some cases. So, again, this is his upgrade, seems pretty textbook, pretty easy to understand. Let's talk about the actual scenarios for him so that you guys get an idea of what I'm talking about. So for starters, here is Ryoma's new refund numbers. On screen now, you guys should be able to see, quite literally here, he works in pretty much every single possible scenario now. Before, he didn't quite, but he did work in the vast majority of scenarios. Pretty much everything you would want to take him against anyways. So to explain this to you guys, let's start with the refund numbers over here. If you guys are aware of how refund works in the game, you should already kind of be me here preaching to the choir at this point, and I won't be able to explain much to you. But if you're not aware of how refund numbers in the game work, understand that overkill plays a factor in this. You get actually 50% increased NP generation from an overkill hit. And the way overkill works is that any hit that deals damage, either that results in a kill or after a kill, will deal overkill hit, modifier damage and NP gen. So the idea behind this is that each Noble Phantasm has hit counts on it. Those Noble Phantasms, again, the hit that actually is responsible for the kill will be an overkill hit, even though it won't display the word for that hit, which is interesting. But any hit after it will also be considered overkill. So as a result, we can look at a scenario like this, and we can assume, hey, if we're going up against 3 enemies, he's got a 3-hit MP, so the maximum number of hits would be 9. How many of those hits are overkill? Well, if we kill the wave, that's at least 3 overkill hits. If we don't kill, it's 0. That's going to be your problem right there. So even in a scenario with double casteria against neutral enemies, this includes things like again, archers and sabers and lancers and stuff like that, because they are neutral for refund purposes. A neutral enemy, 0 overkill hits, he'll still refund 57% with double casteria. That's good. That's solid. That's shoring him up quite a bit. He was at about 50% before now, so he does get a little bit of a bump up there. At 3 hits, he's at about 66% here. 67%. Not quite a nice even number, but hey, maybe with a 4th or a 5th overkill hit, we can get to a nice 70, and that might help things out. At 9 out of 9 overkill hits, this is the maximum possible, and it's highly unlikely that this occurs. You are looking at 85% NP gain with double casteria. What does that mean? You're not full refunding with Ryoma, at least not without a 3rd support. At that point, you'd be looking at something like a Shufu, Nero Bride, Paracelsus, or even, you know, a Proto Merlin, something like that, to actually facilitate a full loop. But again, like I said, odds are you're not going to get that 9 out of 9 overkill hits. So as we start to look at the other scenarios here, now we're up against a 2 enemy wave where it's just neutral looping at best. A 2 enemy wave, we're only going to get 6 possible hits. We need 4 out of 6 to reach that nice even 50%. That's unlikely to occur, because same deal, it's like that's just even more firepower you would need in order to achieve the overkill hit. But at even 2 out of 6 overkill hits, meaning you killed the wave, you're at 44%. That's still no slouch. And this is where, again, a lot of his refund is just kind of hard baked in. He's going to naturally get it due to having a lot of arts up. So really, no matter the amount of enemies you're facing, he's still going to generate some Noble Phantasm. And that's working to his advantage here, especially as a unit that has a baked in 50% charge. Yeah, you can't split that charge up, but you can definitely make a whole lot of use out of it. And then as we look towards the last scenario here, you're going to see this is a 2 enemy Berserker wave. Now, Berserkers are notoriously hard to loop against. They're very nasty in terms of the amount of refund they will give you. Yeah, you can deal effective damage to them, so you maybe get more overkill hits potentially, but you don't get as much Noble Phantasm generated from hitting them precisely. This is where this buff actually does help him. Before now, he would have really struggled to do a 2 enemy Berserker wave. This really shores that up. So at 0 out of 6 overkill hits, he's still at 30%. At 2 out of 6, he's at 35%. And at maximum possible 45% refund with double Castoria. So this is the impact that his slight NP gain upgrade has had, is it's going to allow him to shore up some of these numbers. But frankly speaking, even in his old scenarios, he could do 2 enemy waves, and he could do, again, Black Grail looping in any of these scenarios. What he couldn't do is he couldn't do a 2 enemy Berserker wave before this update. Now he can do 2 enemy Berserker, which at least is just going to help shore him up in the scenarios where he maybe just doesn't have as many enemies, or maybe there's a mixed in Berserker in some of these waves. It's going to help make him a little bit more consistent. So yeah, the NP gain helps, but it's not nearly as big of a deal as most people think, because again, he already was a Black Grail looper and already could handle non-standard nodes. That's something that a lot of people didn't give him credit for, unfortunately, for better or worse. If you did end up in a scenario where maybe just somehow you couldn't manage to get enough refund out of him, we've got a couple of extra suggestions for you guys. Obviously, Black Grail and things like that are going to be the main craft essence suggestion, but if you maybe are going to struggle a little bit more, something like Sign of a Smiling Face can be a really good one, or it's more, I guess, budgetary version Royal Icing, which is an old welfare CE. If you need something like Invuln Pierce, Winds of Spring can be really, really nice for him, as this gives some additional arts up, Invincibility Pierce, and NP damage that'll scale with an Oberon. And a much newer CE with the Moon here, the Durga CE, that is actually also all attack scaling, NP damage, NP gain, and arts up. So pretty much just a more modern version of Sign of a Smiling Face. Each one of them can be a potential replacement if you need to squeeze out just a little bit more for some reason. Let's talk about the actual charge scenarios, though, that we are mentioning now with regards to his actual upgrade. So to give you guys an idea, on screen you guys should now be seeing 4 different compositions potentially for how he would work. And the first one that we're going to look at right here is going to be the 2-2X Berserker wave. This is a scenario in which there are only 2 enemies in both the front 2 waves, and they're all Berserkers. How do you loop with them? Well, we're going to loop from 0% charge. We're going to start out with his append. We're going to use double Castoria, and we're going to use Oberon with him in the back line. So with his maxed out mana loading, we're then going to use all of the Castoria skills on him. We're going to use his first and third, obviously, as well. But we're going to save one of the Castoria skills, basically one of the NP gains, for a later turn. That should bring us up to full charge. We'll fire off the NP. He'll refund about 29%, pretty much on the dot. So that nice number that we'd maybe need to round up to 30% there. We're then going to use the remaining Castoria 20% and Ryoma's own 50% charge right there. That's going to bring us up to 99%, which will round up and will be full for us. From there, you can go ahead and rotate one of the Castorias if you want, or save that until wave 3, fire off the NP, and then now in turn 3 here, you'll have refunded about 35%, but you have Oberon. He gives 70% charge, so that's enough. Boom, there you go. You managed to complete a 2-2X Berserker wave. In 3-3X, it gets even easier. It opens up quite a bit more. It's still pretty much the exact same charge scenario, except Now you don't actually need the mana loading append. Instead, what we're going to do is turn 1, we're going to use all of one of the Castorias and rotate for the Oberon early, and then use his 20% NP damage skill to bring us up to full, because we actually don't need the NP gain there turn 1, because yes, Sakamoto Ryoma actually is a good refund unit. That's going to refund about 44% right there. Boom, wave 2 now, you go ahead and pop the remaining Castoria 20% charge, Ryoma's own 50%, and then on wave 3, after you've NP'd the second time, you'll have actually refunded 50% now, since the node composition is just better, and then that plus Oberon's 50% should be enough simply to complete the loop. Same sort of deal here. Scenario number 3 is another 3-3x Berserker node, so again, poor NP gain off of the Berserkers, but now we're doing it with double Castoria and Nero Bride. This time around, we're going to start out with the append, maxed out, and we're going to use all of one Castoria's skills, rotate immediately, bring the other Nero Bride in, and bring the original Nero Bride in, and go ahead and use all of her skills on Ryoma at that point. Maybe just use the arts up from the second Castoria. Fire off the NP the first time, he's going to refund about 57%, and then from there you should easily be able to do the other Castoria's skills in order to charge him up to full one more time. Fire off the NP, and then you should get 66% refund for wave 3. Ryoma's own 50% charge skill is all you need, so that's actually a pretty nice, even composition, should flow relatively well for you. And then in our fourth scenario here, you're going to have a 3-3x Archer wave. This one, we're actually going to get away with still no starting charge other than his append, but we're going to use a single Castoria, a Nero Bride, and a Shu Fu. And in this scenario, we're actually going to manage to use all of the Castoria skills turn 1, rotate her out, bring in the Shu Fu, but we're going to go ahead and utilize basically all of Nero Bride's and at least all of Shu Fu's other than her charge skill. That should bring us up to full. Fire off the NP the first time. He's going to refund a whopping 73%. He's actually dealing effective damage against the archers, and they are a neutral target compared to Berserkers, plus just a ton of NP gain in this comp. So from there, we're going to use the remaining Shu Fu 30%. That'll bring him up to full. He'll refund another 73% as we head into wave 3 after his NP, and then his own 50% charge will finish it off. So again, Ryoma is already just a solid looper and works in a variety of scenarios, including non-standard waves where you maybe don't have 3 enemies. So he's somebody that really can go the extra distance due to having that 50% charge skill, because he can pick and choose which turn he wants to use it on, including a single enemy wave. It should be possible if the other enemies are, say, a triple set in some of the other waves. So he has quite a bit of capability for being able to make it through a really weird node. Looking at his old damage numbers here now on screen, we can talk about this, and basically he is somebody that obviously has gotten a nice NP interlude, and the easy way to understand this is just like the point I pointed out before. Since his NP interlude is standard for the amount of damage it adds, there's your new NP1 number right there as NP2. So as we go to look at the new numbers, boom, there you go. It is still the 31, almost 32k there now for NP1. The old NP5 number is now the new NP2 number, and his damage numbers are much improved across the board. Now, as we look at him in an actual composition here, you guys can see wave 3, we get that really nice spike here, basically due to Oberon compared to his old numbers. Quite literally, he's a lot more shored up on waves 1 and 2, but for wave 3, the old number there is 301k. It is now 401k, which, again, same deal. If you look at the old numbers and you look at NP2 there, you can see that direct correlation. So really, really nice jump up in damage, almost 100k difference, and these are still neutral numbers, as opposed to if he's actually up against something like archers and deals effective damage. So definitely a solid upgrade for him. For comparison, though, let's see where he lands in regards to the meta situation. Vitra is our odd girl out at this point, as we obviously know that Vitra needs an upgrade. Even with a standard NP interlude, Vitra's only looking at about 335k by wave 3, and quite literally 360k in her actual niche. So Vitra probably needs a non-standard interlude or some sort of additional impact, maybe a just really strong skill buff. The one thing I will say is Vitra doesn't necessarily have to be doing as much damage as Ryoma. And the reason why is because Ryoma doesn't have a niche. So her having the anti-divine niche, it does not necessarily mean that she has to deal more damage than him, but she should deal more damage than him if that divine niche is coming into play. That's how they should balance it appropriately. She does less damage overall, but more if the anti-divine is being used. So that's something to watch out for in the future. Maybe Vitra will get another buff coming up here at the anniversary round of strengthenings, hopefully sooner if possible. Another interesting one here is actually going to be Summer Melt, another AoE Arts Lancer. And interestingly enough, Ryoma's buff is so strong at that 401k that even an NP5 Melt will not outdamage an NP1 Ryoma now. So in this regard, we may be looking at a time where we could potentially see an upgrade now to some of the 4 stars. So definitely be an interesting thing to see. But I do think, at least in that regard, Melt still has a lot of advantages. She's really, really strong in the refund department and does have a 60% charge to boot. So quite literally quite a bit of capability for that unit. Though admittedly, her waves 1 and 2 damage are what really probably need the examination the most, as that's where she tends to have some issues due to the one-turn nature of her sort of steroid attached to her charge skill. Percival is another one that we can look at here, and he's very much in a similar situation. This Ryoma buff is strong enough to kind of get him away from the 4 stars in terms of their threat. So if you're somebody that has an MP5 Percival, obviously he's still a really, really solid, good unit, but yeah, Ryoma actually will outpace him now. Fion is another interesting one, and interestingly enough, you guys should denote that Fion actually can do the most out of the 3 in terms of his overall output. But this is just, typical Fion things. Fion's got a really clunky kit. Some people don't mind it. They're absolutely willing to use it. Other people have their favorites and prefer not to use Fion. So the choice is yours in that regard if you want to too. But let's not stop there. Just real quick, one more comparison just kind of for the road. Since everyone was going to ask it anyways, here are the Melisson numbers. So Melisson's still clocking in at about 440k raw output. So Ryoma is not stronger than Mel. But Ryoma at 401k is a lot closer than he used to be. Instead of getting handedly beat, they're in the same ballpark now. The advantage, though, is going to be Mel being able to tap into a man niche if Koyanskaya provides it. That's going to be a little bit unfortunate for, obviously him, but at that point in time, you just got to say it is what it is. And this is one of those things where, again, the devs have had some balance problems in the Lancer category. Definitely seems like we're on a redemption arc, though, where they're trying to buff up some of the other Lancers to at least be similar to Mel, because I think the devs have realized it's really tough getting people to roll for units that just, frankly, are behind the curve. So let me know what you guys think about the Ryoma buff and what you would like to see with regards to the next Lancer buff. I think I can probably hazard a guess. I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you all for watching. I will see you guys for the next one later. Don't forget, Lotto Guide, out now. Go watch. Please do me that favor. Share it with all your friends. Spread the love, right?